This is just one example showing that animals also mourn. The grieving bear would be staying with Carl's family as he promised himself to provide his master's last wishes with a loving home. The man added that this bear was everything to him. Animals provide comfort, not just in death, but also in other difficult times, whether it's depression, job loss, or a move across the country. Experts say that dogs know when people are dying or grieving through body language, cues, smells only they can detect, and even other ways not yet known. Historically, wild animals have been known to express grief by letting out a yelp, wandering aimlessly, and eventually reorganizing their pack. The human-animal bond is a complex social bond that is mutual, affectionate, and also thrives around a family system. A friendship between humans and animals can take many forms, from mutual respect to endless love and devotion. In today's story, we're going to tell you an amazing tale in which a wild animal turned out to be more human than an actual human. A man came to a small town in Southern California after the fall of communism. His parents became owners of quite a large piece of land they formed and a small tobacco factory. When Carl was still a child, he still had to help on the farm. In fact, he did not have any time for himself because there was always something to be done on the farm. And this was the time of harvesting, and he needed to feed the animals and manage the business of the factory. Carl's family was great in both business and in farming. He had had enough of it, though, especially when he heard various stories from his friends from the school he went to in a neighboring town. When other boys could read books, play, or watch TV, he had to work. Therefore, he decided that when he grew up, he would leave the countryside and study so that, on the one hand, he could experience the great city life, and on the other hand, free himself from the regular duties. Now, as soon as they heard this, his parents immediately did not like it. They forbade him to leave and said that he had to stay with them and continue to help on the farm and in the factory. They gave him his younger brother Paul as an example, who, at the age of 16, quit school and worked on the farm with them. Carl, however, was not going to listen to such a talk. He was simply unhappy because he wanted something more from his life. So one day, when the rest of his family was at church for a service, he slipped out and went to Chicago. He only left his family a mysterious letter stating that he had gone to college. He didn't even write where, although the journey was quite stressful for him. He was happy with his decision, though. Carl understood that it would not be easy for him, but he was not going to give it all up. He prepared himself mentally for what awaited him. When he reached Chicago, he knew he had to get some money. He started asking strangers for some change. He had to start somehow so that he could think about college. However, on his second day on the street, he was approached by a man named Charlie. He was surprised that the boy, full of energy, was asking strangers for money. That's why he asked Carl why he was doing it. When the boy honestly told him about his plans, it touched the man, who offered him a job and a roof over his head. When Carl heard this, he could not believe it, and there were tears of emotion in his eyes. Soon he started working, and with the money he saved, he was able to rent a studio apartment. Later, he got into economics and law studies. Throughout his studies, he worked diligently, which resulted in him being one of the best students of his year. Carl knew he didn't have any connections and understood that he had to do more than the others to have a chance at success. However, the man who helped him since his arrival in Chicago recommended him to the chief of an economic solutions firm, who was Charlie's cousin. This was one of the largest business firms in the city, and Charlie presented Carl as a gifted, amusing, ambitious, and dedicated man. He decided to give Carl a chance. This is how his own career began, and he was extremely successful throughout this time. Carl, though, did not maintain contact with his family. He didn't even know what to say to them. His life was successful, and he felt he owed nothing to his parents. One day, however, a phone call surprised him. As Carl picked up the phone, on the other side, a man introduced himself as his younger brother, Paul. It turned out that some of Paul's friends were in Chicago and they saw an advertisement for the economical solution firm where Carl worked. They immediately told Paul about it, and Paul, after some thought, decided to contact his brother. The younger brother gave Carl the sad news. It turned out that their mother had died 2 years ago, and their father had died just 2 days ago. Now, for the successful man, it was quite a shock, although he was preparing for such an eventuality in the end. He'd broken off his contact with his family for 15 years. And although he didn't really know his brother anymore, Paul asked Carl to come to the funeral. Now, the older brother was a bit afraid, but he agreed to the suggestion. Carl already had a wife with whom they were expecting a child. He decided that he would go to his homeland alone. He was a bit afraid of what would happen when he got there, and he didn't want his beloved to have to be stressed unnecessarily. When he returned home, he saw the farm that hadn't changed much during his absence. Here and there, he could see signs that a long time had passed, but practically everything was as Carl remembered it. He was greeted by Paul, who told him what had happened after his escape to Chicago. As Carl had expected, the parents did not take it well. They thought for a long time that it was only temporary. They thought when their son experienced hardships caused by his decision, he would return home like a dog with his tail between his legs. However, as the following weeks passed, they began to accept that this would not happen. Mom was becoming very sad about it. When she died of cancer, she regretted that she could not say goodbye to her older son. After her death, their dad neglected himself, and in principle, all responsibilities fell on the shoulders of Paul. The father did not care about anything. Only his big pet, a bear who had rescued him from potential death. At some point in the forest, the father had helped a wounded bear, and it became fiercely devoted to him. It even showed this bear to have a more human purpose. Now, apparently the animal was very unhappy since the death of its guardian. That evening, Carl was telling his brother about his life and the problems he faced. Then, suddenly for Carl, everything went black. The thing that he remembered next was waking up locked in a wooden coffin, feeling his father's ashes all around him, which Paul had shown him the day before. From outside, he heard muffled sounds of a funeral and strange shouts. Paul was trying to hurry the funeral process in a peculiar way. He was shouting that they had to bury the coffin fast, and it wasn't important to follow the usual religious rituals. Everyone was surprised by his actions, but at the same time, they predicted that he was shocked by his father's death. At this time, Carl was in the coffin with his father, but he couldn't move or speak as Paul had given him some drugs. When they were about to put the coffin into the grave, he suddenly heard screams, and then the impact of falling. The coffin falling on the ground damaged the coffin, which opened, and the lawyer looked into the bear's eyes. The animal, however, only wanted something else and started looking for it in the coffin. However, when nothing was found, she despaired and ran towards the forest, dragging a piece of string which someone tried to grab and hold on to. Carl saw that there was a handful of people gathered in a cemetery, and he froze. Nobody knew what was happening. However, in the group of people, there was a local policeman who was also a cousin of Carl and Paul. The man decided to explain what had happened. It turned out that the younger brother resented his older brother for running away from home, leaving him alone with all the chores. Also, it was in the will of the father that half of the farm be bequeathed to the older brother. Paul was angry by this because he thought he deserved it, especially when he saw his brother who was doing so well in Chicago. He thought it had all fallen from heaven to him. Everything would have worked out if the father had not wished the bear to be at the funeral. The animal sensed that there was something alive in the coffin, and it thought it was his beloved owner, and so it tried to free him. However, when Carl fell out of the coffin despairingly, it escaped. The whole situation was ridiculous. If Paul had told Carl about it, he would have gladly given him his part of the farm. It would even buy his brother a combine harvester or tractor. He had his own life in Chicago. He had a wife there and a child who would soon be born to him. He didn't think of staying in his homeland. He had a terrible association with it. Now, he just wanted to get back out of there, never come back after what his brother did. He said that he would not bring any charges against Paul, just leave him alone. He told his brother to keep the farm. He packed his things up and in less than an hour was on his way back to his real home where he was always happy. He couldn't believe that he owed his life to a bear. What a brave animal to save his soulmate as if they share names. There are many arguments about whether or not animals have the emotional capacity to express grief. Research in evolutionary biology, cognitive biology, and social neuroscience supports the view that many different animals have rich and deep emotional lives. People with companion animals or service animals will strongly argue that animals express numerous feelings such as fear, anger, shame, excitement, and grief. The human-animal bond is a complex social bond that is mutually affectionate and thrives around a family system. Animals view you as a member of their pack. This bond provides safety and security for the family members and their pets and stabilizes everyone's well-being.